Welcome to the Renaissance Sermon. I am your host and mystic. You can call me Sleepy. This is going to be an interesting episode, and I think there's a 1984-ish tone to that, so it may reflect in the episode name. I haven't decided yet, but wait, for those that are new, we always kick things off with a bit of a meditation and a prayer. So if you will follow along, you can close your eyes, and we're going to start with some deep breathing, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to fill in that lower lobe of the lung and breathe out, okay? So, and breathe in through your nose, slowly to the lower lobe. Your belly might stick out actually a little bit when you do this. So breathe in. Breathe out, and empty that lower lobe first, okay? And we're just gonna, with that breathe out, we're just gonna let go of all of the troubles, anything that we're really holding on to throughout the week. Just let it all go, okay? So we're gonna breathe in one more time through the nose into the lower belly, and we're gonna breathe out. Nice. All of it. Let everything go, okay? Financial obligations, credit card debt, anything that you got. Okay, just let it all go. Good. Okay, so we're going to do this one more time. We're going to breathe in through our nose. Slowly let the lungs fill. And then we're going to breathe out. Good. Let it all go, okay? Any type of responsibilities, credit card debt, financial obligations, just let it all go. Good. Now, with your eyes still closed, what I want you to do is I want you to imagine whatever entity of choice that you may pray to, right? So whether that's like God or, some kind of deity, even a demon, we don't judge here. You can just picture that, right? Now, what I want you guys to do is I want you to imagine how much that entity means to you, right? So in terms of a dollar amount, preferably something you have available on your credit card right now, okay? I want you to think about that, okay? This next part might require you to open your eyes, but what I want you to do is I want you to, with that number in mind, don't even think about it. Just go to the link in the description of this video, open up the coffee link for the donations. I want you to give whatever that number is. I want you to donate it to that coffee link description, okay? Good. And when you're done with that, I want you to close your eyes and imagine that entity smiling right back at you. Right? You did wonderful. You did really great. So now that we got the important business out the way, we need to, I suppose, talk about or just note the astrology for this particular week, and that's going to be really a new moon. This is going to be a new moon in Leo, right? And this particular new moon, we have a new moon every month for those that don't know, but in terms of with this new moon, it's special, okay? And it's special for its own particular reason, and it's very unique in terms of how that new moon is aspecting other bodies in the actual astrology. And like I said, we're not going to go over the actual meaning and try to we're not going to actually go over the meaning and provide you guys with a really description of what's going on or some kind of analysis in terms of what to expect. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to tell you that there's definitely something that you may need to pay attention to Of course, if you're a Leo, of course, but also if you are, really, it's in everyone's chart. It's happening. It's taking place in everyone's chart. So, just important to take a look at that. And I always remember the disclaimer: don't, like, when you hear Sleepy talk about astrology versus another person talk about astrology, there's likely going to be some differences in terms of the rulership, but don't, like, attack another person saying that's not this, that's not that. That let that person do practice in the way that they practice, and if you find it to be useful, then use it. If not, then don't use it. But please don't attack other astrologers. A lot of them are doing really good work, especially on YouTube. So just be open to the idea of what it represents, and be understanding that this is really more, probably more recommended to treat astrology as an art and a science. So work with that understanding. So in terms of our first segment is really going to be really short, because this is just me just teasing you guys with a particular paywalled article on really building conversions and transforming cities. And if you guys want to hear a little bit more about that, you can look in episode 6, where we talk about really just downtown and how downtown is transforming. The article kind of transformed and evolved out of that, along with a little bit more analysis and understanding. I highly recommend you take a look. I'm just a guy looking in from the outside, but I heard, this is word on the street, that it's the most informative article, the best article ever. I mean, I don't know. I just heard it.
The conclusion that if you speculate without evidence that amounts to an actual conclusion to an investigation, they're going to be very upset today, because it turns out that the DOJ and the FBI have concluded that Epstein didn't have a client list and died by suicide, according to a memo detailing the findings obtained by Axios. Now, again, does this put to bed like all inquiries? Of course not. People can continue to speculate as much as they want. And I think there's still open questions here regarding how did Epstein make his money? That's a very serious open question. And the speculation for a long time was he made his money from blackmail. But the DOJ and the FBI, again, run by people like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, are telling you, I'm not telling you, they're telling you, people who are members of the Trump administration,
who could
people
doubt
you
that
elected
crew?
and put
Right.
into these positions to get you the truth on this matter, are telling you that he didn't, in fact, he was not murdered. He did not keep a client list. And he did not blackmail powerful figures.
I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government.
I think Trump knows they'll kill him. I think Trump knows that they'll kill him.
This is not really even a scripted segment. I just want to say, if you are listening to independent media, I just want to let you guys know, these guys are complicit in the cover-up, right? And to various degrees. A lot of you guys are trying to, like, there's a lot of people maybe giving leeway to one side and, the other. The lack of respect that I have for a lot of these guys out there is tremendous. Yeah, it's tremendous in terms of there is such a stark difference between before and after in terms of this particular event in media. And you guys can happily turn away from a lot of these guys, and I encourage it, honestly, because it's honestly disgusting to see some of this stuff come out, and the way it comes out, and the way things are going right now. And a lot of these people have chosen to fall on their swords, and a lot of them are trying to maybe save face, but I feel like they're also falling. Like, there is no calling it as you see it, right? In terms of the case that I'm talking about, for anybody who's had their hand in the sand, this idea of the cover-up with, like, Epstein and how Donald Trump is likely on the list is it's disgusting. Like, these guys, these independent media guys, they're not looking at the information out there. A YouTube search will tell you in a very quick second how likely it is that this guy's really got something to hide. And I mean, it could be surprising, and it could be something to where you start to, kind of look at certain things, but people are saying all types of things like fire Pam Bondi and things like that, and it is so disappointing. And I think we need to understand something. When these people have really shown their lack of morals and credibility in one stance, we have to understand that translates to any other thing, right? So this whole COVID thing, if they come out with some disclosures or something, one, RFK is already a joke, but if they come out with some like if for anybody who hasn't heard, like, he's talking about like, the number one health issue is anti-Semitism. I'm like, yeah, who do they got you on camera with? Like, what are you talking about? like, what are you doing? It's crazy. But the idea of like the idea of what's happening, what's taking place now, it translates, right? We can't expect real disclosure. We can't expect anything from these people in terms of them to have some kind of moral backbone. And that's important. And I really do think it's important enough to insert it here, even non-scripted. Now, this is going to be a segment based on the War Crime series by Global Investigative Journalism Network. And this segment is particularly related to, or this article that we're citing here is going to be particularly related to sexual violence. We really have this kind of thing with using and tooling sexual violence in various ways, but also just because, war gives opportunity for people to really show their lack of morals in a lot of situations, I would say. When it comes down to this idea, women and girls, they're known to be abducted and assaulted for various reasons, but also this happens to boys and men, and this discussion, I think, there's more talk about women and girls, but the idea here is that it's more taboo in terms of the idea of boys and men being also victims here. And a quote directly from the article is, "Rape is the most neglected of war crimes. Accountability for it is the exception, not the rule." And that's the quote there. And apparently one third of women worldwide will experience sexual violence, and this in times of war and in places of war, this occurrence increases, right? And widespread reporting is not something that helps or does not normally help in preventing this, which could lead to all types of things. But of course, the women feel betrayed in a lot of cases. And it appears, like I said, the idea of war, it's like an opportunity for a lot of people. Like, it's crazy, but it really is an opportunity for a lot of these guys to do these things. And but what was really surprising was that sexual violence it can also be more apparent and really become more apparent in terms of even with an intimate partner in times of war, which is interesting but noteworthy. This is also something that happens around camps and places that are supposed to be sheltering victims from the war, right? It's like this happens, it's known to happen, and the idea, the culture of war seems to really just allow for this to take place and be normalized. There's actually economies that kind of like start to use this aspect of trafficking, and this was made apparent through the Associated Press when they were uncovering how ISIS extremists were using Telegram to sell women and girls and they were just they were just on this platform just selling them. I don't know how that quite works. It's kind of crazy, but the idea here is the quote. The term conflict-related sexual violence, as defined by the United Nations, it does refer to the R word. I'm not sure how that works on YouTube. Sexual slavery, forced prostitution, forced pregnancy, forced abortion, enforced sterilization, forced marriage, and any other form of sexual violence or comparable gravity perpetrated against women, men, girls, or boys that is directly or indirectly linked to a conflict. That's the end of the quote. And these definitions I'm noticing are really something in terms of how they define certain things, and it sheds a lot of light on that, because of course when we think about, you'd be surprised, right, like in terms of actually digging into some of these definitions, much like this particular situation now, when we talk about conflict related sexual violence, this definition does expand that in terms of outside of just the normal R word to other forms and other ideas that you may not have just originally thought about. And in terms of investigating the idea of war crimes in general, it seems like this is important to really understand, and in terms of making a case in general. And if you ever find yourself trying to build a case, or if that's ever something that needs to be done. And the use of sexual violence can be strategic for various reasons, right? And a few things. One, humiliation and decreasing morale, right? This particular idea is useful in the dehumanization process and helping to really further propagandize people, right? Because when you're choosing to kill another person, it's really useful for this person not to represent something that is like yourself. It's extremely useful, especially in times of war. And when it comes down to the idea, humiliation, decreasing morale, victims, they're often like shunned. Like they're like shunned by their husbands and their families, and so these guys, like a lot of victims, they're not going to speak out. They will hide, right? That's something that a lot of people haven't quite thought about, probably, in terms of men in general. But this idea is, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The second thing is clearing an area. Literally clearing an area of people who currently occupy the area. Because, I mean, when people find out that the invading enemy is essentially just has this culture of just sexual violence in general, people want to leave. People don't want to be around that, and they a lot of times they'd rather go through the hardships of moving and trying to find a new way of living in a lot of cases. And the article even quoted something just to give you guys an idea, because I didn't quite think about clearing an area before this article, but the article quotes an official saying that sexual violence is cheaper than bullets. And that is not something that the idea of it being efficient to allow this to occur is, I mean, I'm always trying to tell people and promote this idea of a renaissance rather than a revolution. And this idea really does highlight this concept, because to think that there can be some form of efficiency and intelligence operating behind this culture that is to this extent of clearing an area of people is insane. And I think people need to understand this idea of renaissance versus revolution. That's the argument that needs to be made here. You don't want to see these type of environments come about. These aren't places that are that we have people just, able to just exist and be, we can just rob a food store or something like that and just get our stuff and we'll be okay. Good people don't rise up in chaos. Good people, you don't see that that's not the trend, right? In chaos, you get very, very monstrous people. And that needs to be understood, that we don't want that. And that's a bit of a sidetrack, but the idea of revenge is another thing, right? Because when armies they fail at campaigns, or their enemies have successes, they want to enact revenge, and that's a way to do that, which is, I feel like there's this idea, the hellscape that's really can be created in a chaotic environment is something that we should be very much aware of, and try to inform people about this when they scream about revolution and they dream about the zombie apocalypse or something. It is not nearly what people think it is. I imagine. In any case, next one is to intimidate politicians, journalists, or activists, right? And a lot of times it's just like, hey, we don't want our light to be shed on what we're doing. We will try to make whoever does shed that light feel very real fear. And this is something that they can use in terms of the idea of this type of this type of strategy. It's something that we need to understand that does happen. Also, changing the ethnic balance in a region by impregnating women. This is, I think the Mongolian people or something like that, but that kind of really maybe that this makes me think about in terms of how that they were changing the landscape, basically, when it comes down to the ethnic balance of that, the region. This is increasingly worrisome to think more and more about, just as you kind of go through things. But the article in general, it talks about how to investigate crimes and how to interview victims, right? Because, and this is going back to our point earlier in terms of the idea of humiliation, and there was some situation mentioned in the article of some English journalists, and it's hard not to call the guy a fucking idiot, honestly. And then it's just like this guy gets up and he loudly asks a group of survivors if they can identify victims of sexual violence, basically. And it's just like, how stupid. Like, I'm just like how ignorant could you possibly be? I'm sorry, it's just like that level of just absolute foolishness is crazy to me. But that is something that happened, and it's people should understand. Like, even before really coming into contact with this article, it was just like, hey, this is probably like you should probably have an understanding that this is a sensitive topic, right? Like, but even like when you talk about the humiliation, the idea that some cultures are like, they will literally shun their family members. They will shun, after these type of things. It can be disastrous, right? Especially in a group of survivors. And you just imagine, somebody points to somebody who's trying to remain quiet or something and trying to, hide the fact, and it's just like, it's hard for me to imagine that guy in that plane. It's just like, it's like, yeah, give me your badge and go home. Like, what are you doing? But in any case, it's a sensitive topic, and people may face consequences if this is made public, right? In this article, it talks about the idea of really being able to tool like third-party organizations, right? So this can be like activists, survivor groups, humanitarian organizations, and really allow them to be really the middlemen in interacting with victims, right? Because a lot of these guys, they want the option of privacy and protection from public scrutiny in many cases, and that needs to be made very much valuable to them, I'd say. This lady, Ruth Omar, freelance journalist, and she recommends that you prioritize listening and making them feel comfortable. And the idea here is that victims are going to be much more likely to share stories when they feel like the interviewer actually cares about them and their experience, and is also very much empathetic to what's taken place. Now, in this renaissance, we need to be better at taking these type of crimes seriously, right? When it comes to utilizing like dehumanizing tactics and taking advantage, the soldiers have to realize that there will be consequences. That can't be something that we allow to prevail or allow to kind of permeate any environment when it's, especially when it's made public, right? And the idea here is that, you want I couldn't imagine just the betrayal that a lot of these guys kind of felt when there was a situation in the article where a group of women, they were trying to report hey, these guys are basically taking advantage, and they have a culture of doing this, and nothing took place, nothing happened. And I'm like, this is you don't put this stuff in this. You don't just shove this thing into a dark corner in a box. Like, you gotta. People have to have real trust over the ruling class, or the whatever, the government, whatever. They need to have that. That's not something that we can just treat like it can be just thrown away at whenever we feel like it. It has to be treated like a very real factor for a civilized society to occur, right? Like, international law in general, like, the idea here, and when we talk about war, is that the world realizes that there is a responsibility that comes with the power to harm other people, right? So when we have soldiers who are given weapons, they have to be held to a high standard. That can't be something that we, just allow for other, just people who have no sense of, no sense of responsibility to essentially just act. It is, and it can easily turn into a problem. In the armies that allow this type of culture to really exist, they should be shamed on a world stage and face very real consequences. This isn't something that we can simply just allow to persist. And in any world, international lawful environment, we can't allow for that to exist, right? When these people or these leaders of these countries or whatever, they go to some kind of UN meeting or something like that, they need to be really shamed. They need to be very much made to feel ashamed of what they've done, and they need to, like, tariffs, weapons, technology, whatever you can withhold from these people, do it. Like, absolutely do it. Like, you don't want these aren't the people who need to come up. And our CIA has, like, such a history of just platforming just monstrous people, and it's an embarrassment, honestly. Like, it's really an embarrassment. I think I'm happy to be treated as the ignorant American, or I'd happily be treated as the ignorant American than the knowledgeable American in terms of what we do. It's something that we certainly need to work on, and certainly need to develop in terms of the idea of a civilized society. This is now. I want you guys to understand. This is actually torture, right? And this is not torture as in we understand it, because torture as in, like, we understand it is, hey, this person's held here for X amount of hours and they're constantly under this particular environment of torture. When this happens, the psychology behind this, that's not something that just dissipates, right? Because they're, like, back at home, the victims could be back at home with their family. This isn't something that just dissipates. This is something that can follow someone for the rest of their life, especially if they don't seek, therapy and anything else. It can persist to a higher degree in a lot of cases. And I think in terms of this article, for the sermon, the idea here is the zodiac sign of Scorpio really holds rulership over the idea of sexual violence, but also other indicators, right? So besides Scorpio, there's other indicators, right? And just to throw a few out there: eighth house ruler, eighth house placements, and also Pluto, where Pluto is, what's it aspecting, stuff like that, and how it's aspecting things. You can kind of see certain things through that, okay? And the Scorpio trauma and Scorpio suffering is something that require Scorpio therapy, right? So investigators, Scorpio, should realize that in situations like this, they may need to really carry a Scorpio therapist care in approaching victims of Scorpio sexual violence. This next report is on public records, but also new systems, right? And I think people should understand that we are in a period where publicly available information is actually a gold mine for people who are willing and able to organize and present information in a certain way. And this is important, right? Because at some point, even Big Brother came to a realization that, you know, we're actually getting faster information, and, you know, through Twitter at some point. This was earlier in the 2000s. I want to say, like, forget, maybe during the rise of Twitter, before the fraud took over. But the idea here is that social they had to limit us. They had to limit what we're available, or not limit us, but limit search engines and how search engines operate. Because if you look at search engines, you'll realize that social media posts aren't searchable, right? And the idea here is that you don't necessarily want to categorize information, because it can be used in various ways, some of which may be really malefic in nature, we'll say. And we don't have an understanding, right? But if we develop this particular idea, we'll get to that later, actually. We have to realize that developing whatever this idea is, we'll talk a little bit, I suppose, on it. The people who do this, the people who develop and truly get into creating unique or useful systems today, they can easily rival our own government agencies, right? And I think a good story that really does shed light on this idea is how really the U.S. government during, like, World War II, they essentially recruited the mob to use their power and control, well, in a lot of different ways, honestly. But in terms of, with this particular case, they used the mob's power and control over New York ports and dock workers during World War II. The mob had a better network, right? And this is probably due to the idea of how prohibition led to their particular influence, whatever. But the mob was really, utilizing their methods and their systems, and they surpassed that in a lot of cases surpassed the influence that the U.S. government had over people in these particular areas, right? We need to really understand that we're in a position to where we can do the same thing. It's not something that is, outside of your bounds or your peripheries, because you don't have a quote-unquote formal badge from the government or education. Just to give you an understanding, like, I heard this quote, the world isn't run by A students, it's run by C students who are willing to put a gun to someone's head. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of that's an understanding that I think a lot of us need to understand, really take with us when we think about developing these systems and tackling just big projects in general, because I think the world is going to need that. And when it comes down to this idea of mining public records, this can be a significant factor when it comes to separating just you from other sources of media and information that are out there. And there's the article that I'm going to link here is on how to really gain access to public records. And I want to shed light on this idea. And I really want to say something first, because I want people to understand that what I'm about to say, this isn't like, I'm not one of the pearl-clutching Democrats screaming how Trump is racist, right? Like, we have to understand that the rule of law is under attack in a particularly unique way, right? This is very important that people understand this, because I'm going to link this video as well. There's a DOJ whistleblower that came out, right? And they spoke about how really just the conditions that led to his firing in his case. And what is very interesting here is that he worked with, the Trump administration, when it came down to the 2016 to 2020, right? And he did his job, right? They asked for some pretty ridiculous things sometimes, but he went through the process, and the courts denied him, and the courts denied him in in cases that were just like kind of just out off the wall a little bit, but he came back, or he didn't come back, but Trump came back. And that wasn't like something that these guys were like expecting in terms of the new things that really came with that, because this guy particularly, he thought that, hey, these guys are going to come back and maybe they'll be like a little bit more understanding of how to get things past the courts. And this guy lays out how essentially they were planning. They were making real plans revolving around just simply doing something even when it defied just the rule of law, court orders, right? That was really where things started to go real left for the guy. And today, like FOIA officers, they're being fired, and offices are just being essentially emptied out. But so this idea of actually requesting information and learning how to go through public records, it may become more and more important as we move along, because I think we're a lot of systems are eroding, and we need to be careful and be informed about how to essentially things work and things should work, and when things aren't working, how they should work, and allowing us to kind of move forward in the future. Now, this article highlights just basically a strategy in terms of actually approaching just requesting public records. One is this is straight from the article here, right? One is, what paper trail did the people or institutions leave? What specific form would the incident generate? Who does that form get sent to internally? Who reviews it? Who writes it? Who writes something about what they read? Does that form get submitted to another institution? Does that form get entered into a database? Where else would that record show up? thinking about these questions and having awareness about these questions, they will help you in a lot of different ways. Because if you leave it up to, a lot of these guys to fill out your request, they're going to take their time. But if you know what you're talking about, if you ask the right questions, if they realize that, hey, this guy might, he might call my boss, or my boss might actually call me because I don't follow whatever this person wants, they're going to be more likely to stand on your case and help you out if you sound more informed than if you sound less informed when you go to these people. And in this article, it goes over strategies to recover documents, and you may not originally request a lot of these, but they can be extremely helpful, right? Like I said, I can't hammer on this idea of creating systems more, enough, but whatever you come up with, if there is a system that you decide to come up with, you want to request information and you want to develop the system in a very strategic way, right? So to evaluate which organizations and sources, in terms of which ones yield results, without revealing the nature of your quest to entities that may want to impede your progress in a lot of cases, right? Because Big Brother doesn't want to be, exposed. So there may very well be a network in place to make sure that Big Brother's not exposed. And this idea of really knowing more information, it's we talked about how it's going to help in terms of just interfacing with people in general and how they think about you and how they'll respond to you when you are informed. And in terms of this idea, the system, the way you kind of do things, the way you actually document and hold documents and be able to parse out documents or collect documents, the way that can help you get ahead of the game cannot be understated, right? Because with J. Edgar Hoover, right, this is the guy who formed the FBI and got noticed, and he was really able to shine, right? Because when I say he got noticed, I mean before actually forming the FBI, he was noticed for his ability, particularly to document and organize information. In his case, it was like spying on immigrants or something like that, basically. And it was, he did not use his powers for good, but he definitely had a capability, right? The capability to file and organize information. And he was not really a crime fighter, right? This wasn't how he got into actually the FBI in general. He was just really gifted at categorizing, organizing information, right? And for those who don't know, the FBI actually didn't, for a long time, they didn't carry guns. They didn't even carry pistols. They weren't really known as really police. They were more so like lawyers, and these ideas, that what's coming out now, what I'm really trying to promote is the idea of being willing to tackle big projects and create your own databases. And with this particular idea of collecting public records, you can talk to lawyers, advocates, service providers, and staff members, and they'll be able to kind of shed light on what's out there, what's valuable, and trends that you may find useful, and just sources of information that you just find useful, or sources of documents in general. And you can also just research previous law records, which lawyers will be tremendous help with, I'm sure, but also just documents in general, right? Just previous law cases, things that have really kind of shook up that particular, that particular agency or that world. Also, reading the reports by the Inspector General or General Audits, and also reviewing retention data and keys to translate data. So the retention data is basically giving you an understanding of how documents are kept, how long things are kept. And the idea for the keys that translate data, they're going to help because a lot of agencies, they'll have their own keys, right? And the keys like ABC means target whatever, like that's the idea is that when you're reading a lot of this information, some of it could be coded, and it could be coded for a lot of different reasons. And also you can request like various documents that really help inform about more of the documents that you're looking for. So this is particularly something was interesting is that you can request a list of all the FOIA requests that an agency has received over the last 3 years or something like that, right? And that'll give you an understanding of what people are trying to get this place to disclose in a lot of different cases. And highly recommend the article and the video, but the article, it covers some pretty important topics in terms of for anyone investigating agencies. I'm currently thinking about ICE right now, but the idea here is that agencies can charge for fulfilling a FOIA request, and they can do this hourly at times. Okay, so you need to be really informed about how you approach these agencies, and many times when it comes down to them redacting information, you may want to request examples, right? And these examples may help you set expectations in cases where they intend to like basically block out certain segments. You don't want them to simply over redact, or because in some cases you would end up trying to get them to correct the mistake, and the idea is that they can just charge you again, and that can lead to more time and more money. So be aware of that. And in this particular idea of a renaissance, we have to be aware that the responsibility may very well fall on us to keep governments accountable. And this idea, this may require us to have networks and systems that are more easily able to help transition our it's corrupt government, but have it like just basically transition us into just anything else. We need, this can help us. This can really make the transition a lot easier when we have these systems. So don't underestimate yourself in that particular idea of what you can do, right? Because we're in this age of Aquarius, right? And I want you guys to understand, the most intelligent systems, Aquarius, are going to have unique opportunity to be used by the people, Aquarius, right? And this, I think this whole scenario, it really reminds me of something like a book I was reading on internet shutdowns, right? And this took place in some country that was ruled by an authoritarian regime, but essentially the government tried to crack down on the information available by the internet, and a lot of the population, though, the way they responded was essentially a lot of them purchased VPNs, And this right here, the people became more resilient to these type of crackdowns in the future as a result. So this particular authoritarian regime did not see that coming. And I'd really like to see us understand, like, this isn't like what's happening with what's happened with Doge going in and firing all these people or whatever. This isn't, I don't want you guys to see this as an attack by Republicans if you're on the Democratic side. I want you to see this as a failure. Particularly the people who were fired, they were expendable, right? Elon went to the Department of Defense and he sat down and he had a meeting with those people, right? You need to understand this idea of what we're looking at. This is a betrayal, a bipartisan betrayal. This is not like one side attacks the other. You need to really have that understanding. I think the betrayal by the Republicans may be to a different extent, but this is bipartisan, right? You need to understand that this idea of how we respond to this, what we do, the systems we put in place, it won't be Democrats that lead us into the Renaissance, right? They want you to get back into the mindset of incremental change after Palantir's gotten all its, Palantir and all these weird tech guys get all your data and they can do all types of things. They want you back in the mode of incremental change. And that's not, they're not trying to respond in equal opposition to Trump. They're trying to see, well, how can we be the dysfunctional, or how dysfunctional can we be as the other parent? You know what I'm saying? That the child has to come back to at some point. That's their response. That's how they're doing things. We need to understand that, and we need to act accordingly. The people will have to react accordingly, and I mean we got a lot to fix anyway. So let's get to work. Now, this story is about really the criminalization of journalism in Azerbaijan, which I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it is a country in Eastern Europe that borders Iran and the Middle East. So the idea here is that this particular government has decided to crack down on independent media, and they essentially make it illegal. They made it illegal to essentially operate as a journalist. That's not like one, and that's not one of these like pro-government organizations. It's crazy, but I mean the journalists, they are making it hard for the government to just do dirtbag stuff with their dirtbag friends, and there's a woman named Fatima Movlamli. I'm probably saying that wrong, but she has essentially been an exceptional thorn inside of this government in particular. And when you look at her, it's just like she's like giving us some kind of interview or some kind of like not interview, but she's like recording herself before she goes to jail, and I mean, she's just smiling, and it's just like, yeah, this is how it goes, and we're gonna, like, when I get out, I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna keep exposing these corrupt dirtbags. And it's so funny. Like, I think, like, imagine the government like just seeing her post this video and just thinking this angel-faced monster is really just gonna tear us down. And I feel like that's it. That's exactly what we're looking at here, because a lot of these guys they're going to prison, and it's not like they're going to prison with smiles on their faces. And I think as an authoritarian regime, you couldn't, like, there could be nothing more terrible or nothing more terrifying than seeing that, you know. And she has a video on this article, and it's in another language I can't speak, but it is apparently a powerful message to the dictator, right? And it's, I mean, I don't, like, I can't hammer this enough. Like, it's really inspirational to see, like, just her able to, like, keep good spirits under pressure in general, though, right? Because it kind of, like, seeing the video, even though I don't understand it, but it's nice. The government, in terms of how they're actually, quote unquote, legally able to be jailed, the government is essentially just trumping up cases of financial wrongdoing or smuggling in a lot of cases. And the idea here is that all these guys are just getting money illegally to fund their journalism. And I'm just like, okay. But this is really funny because the dictator has been exposed by the journalists he's jailing for smuggling, for smuggling money. And it's crazy to see that. But these governments, which is kind of speaks to, I think, in the beginning of this particular, like, this particular sermon, kind of like had some venom for the independent media, and I think this really does speak to that in terms of, like, just being just complete embarrassing people and fools and just disgusting people in general, right? They're having, like, pro-government media outlets repeat the propaganda that criminalizes these journalists. These outlets are doing things like basically doxing the journalists, they're leaking private texts, and they're making up things, right? It's what they're doing, how they're kind of aiding the government is, I mean, I don't know how corroded you need to be as a person to do and take part in this particular government, but the journalists in these cases or quote unquote the journalists and the reporters in these cases are very much complicit, right? They're a part of the regime, and this is going back to that beginning of our segment, that these quote unquote independent media, they need to be treated as a part of this regime too. That needs to be a thing. That honestly does need to be a thing, because the level of audience capture is breathtaking. If these guys aren't outright being paid by the administration or by people and friends of the administration. This idea of also, like, what this control, this crackdown that's happening with this country, they're also essentially just taking out just media outlets in general. So they're making it illegal to do journalism, and but they're also kind of trying to black out and keep out other outside information from coming in. So this is the West, but also from Russia as well. So these guys are kind of trying to create this blacked out environment here, and I wish them the worst. I wish them the absolute worst. I don't think this person has anything good in mind for anybody other than himself and his friends. And in terms of with us particularly, in terms of how there's a actual connection from the U.S. in this story, the defunding of foreign aid, which I have suspicions about in terms of how that, or why that kind of took place the way it did. it's defunding the actual outlets in a lot of cases, because they relied on foreign aid in a lot of situations, and the defunding has crippled a lot of these people, and in terms of actually like finances that are valuable, and particularly just exposing this particular regime. The suspicion I have, I'm gonna like just put it out there a little bit. The idea here is like Elon knows that a lot of this stuff goes to the people that would very much expose how a lot of things are done outside of America, and how he benefits from that. And it does seem like he wants to make sure that he does what he can to essentially avoid accountability. I don't even know if that's even like a hot take, but that's the idea here. This particular story and idea, I want to say, is something that should be really taken as a warning, right? Because this Trump administration is expanding the whole brick and mortar prison capabilities, and at the same time questioning the legality of media outlets that are critical of him. And I mean, I think I wouldn't underestimate what he would do to distract the rest of the world from the Epstein list. We need to understand that he could turn the gas up very, to basically max out that rev when we talk about distracting people from really this idea. And I don't think it'd work, but I do think that people would take advantage of it, because people forget that this idea, like Epstein, was a bipartisan secret. It wasn't like a one-sided secret. And there are powerful people who do they will do unimaginable things to make sure that list doesn't come out. And it's important that we realize that this administration, as incompetent as a lot of these guys are, they may have very competent help somewhere, somehow, right? And I mean, of course, I think Palantir is a great example of that, but also other people that are kind of in the shadows that we still don't know about. And in terms of this renaissance, this idea, we should understand that centralization of media is a problem. It's a very real problem. Our EPA segment in episode 5 of the Renaissance Sermon, we talked about the importance of independent media and how and the role they played in letting a town know that their water was poisoned. If that news outlet was close to, let's say, a morally corrupt politician, kind of like a lot of these clowns today that are, claiming that they're truth tellers, that town may have not gotten the news, right? And it could have cost people their lives. And that's why I think we need to go ahead and treat these people as they are part of the regime when they decide to give in to audience capture to the level that they have. And at the very least, we need to publicly shame them. But I mean, this is absolutely insane. But we do have people who are actually fighting, who are actually doing things, which is, honestly great, even in just some of, the worst or, really horrific environments in general. Now, this report is going to be, or this segment is going to be linking two different things. One, we talk about in a earlier segment in this particular episode, but also we're also going to talk about in addition to this particular link that we talked about, which is particularly the DOJ whistleblower. We're going to talk about the IRS and a particularly worrisome system that they're developing to share data with just with ICE, but just the government in general. And this idea and this I think the whistleblower, right, and the whistleblower himself, he sheds light on this pressure to ignore laws in general, right? Very important. And in case you are unaware or disillusioned in any way, among the many other lies from this guy or about this guy, Elon is not a genius. He is not motivated or competent enough to perform the audit that he is promising. Right? The main product that Elon sells is his image. That is it. He's not an engineering wonder in any case. You need to understand that. And he's not like just some kind of like multifaceted genius. In fact, if you heard this guy speak and you know anything about, or you have any type of specialization in anything he talks about, and he just kind of like just says on his platform, you realize very quickly, like, oh, this guy's actually not that smart. He doesn't have really, maybe, and you probably still don't understand that he's not that smart in how many of the ideas that he talks about, even on a regular basis. But this idea of the audit in general, it was performative, right? And I want you guys to really see something, that this idea, Elon and a lot of people in this administration that kind of like stand in, the spotlight in a lot of cases, they just don't appear to be like deep state competent actors. That's not the extent of how this goes, right? Because Palantir is involved. Okay? When we in terms of like what's happening today, it seems, and there is, to me, I would say, likely a deep state sanctioned pressure that's allowing and that is in alignment with what is taking place, right? When we talk about the chaos today, or from Doge in general, I think there's an example that I've been bringing up a lot this particular episode, but this concept of J. Edgar Hoover, right? This was essentially, this guy was the head of FBI for 48 years, right? And various presidents, both left and right, wanted to fire J. Edgar Hoover, right? Hoover was too deeply entrenched for this to take place. Now, this idea of the media, the left-leaning media, saying that these like 20-something-year-olds and or teenagers are somehow like, I mean, these Reddit incel people are somehow goons. You know what I'm saying? Like, something's not right here. This doesn't sound believable, at least to me, I'll say, right? And this idea of the firing taking place, we may be looking at a very large step towards 1984, right? For those that haven't read the book and don't really know about the book, please read it. Now, I don't want to call this the beginning of 1984 because we got 9/11 and we got the COVID stuff, right? Because these particular events, I think we can view them as major players in this league, because, and even with Hoover himself, he had a more historical role in this idea of creating the mass surveillance state. And Hoover and his activities got called out after his death by this Frank Church Committee, right? And with the recent example, the more recent example with Edward Snowden, he blew the whistle on really what took place after 9/11. Now, considering how Edward Snowden is still wanted for violating the Espionage Act, it's hard not to believe that Big Brother didn't go off the rails again with COVID, because I want you guys to understand, we didn't have our Edward Snowden of COVID. That didn't happen. That didn't take place, right? We're not seeing any major whistleblowers come out, and we're not seeing any congressional understanding of what happened. We're just kind of hearing, some yells about it, but that was it. Now, as I said before, Elon, I don't view him as a competent person. I don't view him as somebody who is able to just create and contribute to the deep state, or the deep state. Am I saying that right? The deep state? Yeah, deep state. Okay, but the idea here is that his friends, Alex Karp and Peter Thiel, they are competent, and the interview with Peter Thiel, it kind of sheds light on the idea that this guy may actually be a conscious enemy of humanity and freedom in general. And considering the history of the company behind, or the company that Alex Karp and Peter Thiel have, right, Palantir, it isn't a stretch to imagine that the CIA mentored them quite well, right? And this administration, the idea of coming in and disrupting the system or whatever the clown show's going on, this may be essentially this may be helping to put a cap on a lot of this whole total surveillance thing, right? And regardless of this particular theater show, you need to understand that this is not business as usual. And our government, right, the Republicans are definitely complicit on another, I'll say in their own special way, but our government has failed us. That is extremely important that people understand. And this particular article that I'm linking, ProPublica, is highlighting how the IRS is building a computer database, right? There's this guy, DeMello, they put him in place as the acting general counsel at the IRS, right? When I say they, I mean the Trump administration put this guy in place, but they then fired him because he denied ICE essentially this request for 7.3 million taxpayer addresses, right? He was put in place by replacing the last guy. So this idea of him actually having to be fired is worrisome, because I mean, this request that he denied, you need to understand that the IRS, they get about maybe like a little over a dozen address requests for, essentially people who are being under criminal investigation. They'll receive a request address, and the idea here is that they want the most recent address that they filed under for the IRS, right? This, like, they requested 7.3 million addresses at once, when the IRS only gets a little over a dozen very rarely. It didn't make sense, and this guy that they put in place said that this request had multiple legal quote-unquote deficiencies, right? When I say this is not business as usual, I'm not talking about just business as usual with just every single administration. I'm talking about business. This is not business as usual, even by the standards of the first administration for Trump, right? This particular DOJ, the DOJ whistleblower, I'll link the particular article or the particular video there too. This guy speaks a similar tune, right? Because he worked in Trump's first agency, and he didn't see any real red lights like this administration, right? Because they were after foreigners in a certain way, and he was still skeptical of a lot of things, but they still followed the law. That wasn't like a thing that he had to worry about in the first administration. That was just business. It was not to say that it wasn't unprecedented, but it still was to a degree business as usual in terms of dealing with the courts. Now, with this particular administration, he heard talks about ignoring court orders that really raised some red flags, and he was essentially after it was about, I think, the planes taking off to El Salvador or something like that. They were saying, hey, these planes need to go in the sky no matter what, or something like that, and even if there's a court order denying that. And that was a problem. But at some point, this guy Kilmore Abrego Garcia came out, because for some reason, this is not to say that this definitely isn't notable in terms of having a figurehead, period, but it is interesting that we kind of skipped over the idea of, the guy who was essentially jailed for speaking out about just what's going on in terms of Palestine. That is pretty interesting that we turned this guy into the figurehead. But eventually, this guy in particular, he got questioned about Kilmore Abrego Garcia, right? And they completely this administration, thank God for this, that they're incompetent, but it's still a problem. It was still a problem, right? This particular idea, what happened here is he had to be labeled as a terrorist to justify the handling of this case, and the whistleblower wasn't going to just outright lie and just say that there was reasonable cause for him to be for him to be labeled as a terrorist. And he was let go. He was fired. And he noted cases to where his boss had to essentially just sign for documents and in place of him, and where it was essentially a lie. It was definitely something that was not something that you'd expect. And in the IRS request, there would have had to been criminal investigations to justify every address that you shared with ICE, right? And the IRS, this idea of receiving 7.3 million requests, there was no way. There was just no, like, you're not going to tell me that we get a little bit over a dozen and now all of a sudden there's 7.3 million addresses. It's a problem. And these guys, they fired the guy working at the IRS now. We're looking at people in place, which, I mean, honestly, after this is done, they all need to go down with this administration, or assuming that this gets resolved and we still have a civil society or whatever, they all need to go down with this administration, right? I'm talking about every single person that signed those documents, the lawyers that lied under oath and all that stuff, they all need to go down. This doesn't need to be like one or two. This needs to be an entire, the entire system that that was loyal to this clown. But in terms of this right here, this particular system, I think is noteworthy in terms of it really steps us up for Big Brother, because they want to make mass request more possible. They want to make that easier. And this particular request, just for the 7.3 million addresses, this is something that the courts decided was legal, and they said, hey, you can do this, you can interpret the law like this. But they didn't, it's important to note, like, one, I'm not holding my breath for the court system. I truly believe there needs to be real reform is going to require those clowns to get moved too. But the idea here is that they are clearly pushing the bounds of law. But this, I want to, that wasn't what I meant. I meant the idea here of the court system. It's important to understand that they haven't ruled on this particular system that's being put in place and that's being engineered right now. So while I have no faith, or not no faith, I'll say little faith in the court system, there is something to note that they haven't completely failed us. And let me not completely throw them under the bus. There may be some form of moral grounding that some of these guys uphold, which may be something. And they haven't completely given into every single thing with Trump, which is nice, but I still do believe it needs reform. And when it comes down to this particular system, it works by basically taking a spreadsheet from ICE that has just the taxpayer name and some previous address and information or whatever, and then it provides this identification number. Now, if the spreadsheet that ICE provides is matched to a person, then the courts would come up with the most recent, of course the personal identification, but also the most recent address, which is more prevalent in terms of this particular case. But the problem with this system is how it can be expanded, and how easily it can be expanded to everyone, right, to all citizens. And Trump is already kind of talking about shipping U.S. citizens off to El Salvador or whatever, to some kind of Alcatraz camp or whatever. This is something, and it can also be expanded to what information that it provides people. So, like, you can have employers. You can also have things like your family members on that list. And we gotta really be understanding of how much this can impact and strengthen the quality of a total surveillance net when you really need it. And like I need really people to understand that this is the government failing us, right? This is a consistent pattern of government failing us. If you graded the government on a scale, then they would have failed us consistently. Without audit, without, any need to reform itself, it has been failing. And this administration is a very unique failure, but they're definitely taking it up a notch, at least one notch. This response, we can't let it be some kind of like, oh, we're just going to put the Democrats in power and they're going to take control of everything and we can kind of go back to sleep. That can't be the response. That can't be how things are done, right? They'll, the Democrats will argue and complain about how hard it is to follow the rules and how they really can't do anything. Their hands are tied. These aren't people that, it's a lot of this, a significant portion of this is theater, right? There may be some politicians in there that maybe believe in what they're doing and in this particular system or whatever, but I want to let you guys know the people who are in power, who have the power, the networks, the relationships to do something about anything, they're not doing anything. They're not going to do anything, and regardless of who's in power. And this is, like I said, a step towards this is a step towards total surveillance, and we need to understand that. And this administration, I want how far they've gotten, how far they've gotten so far, can really only be, I would say, can really be best explained by being deep state sanctioned behavior, right? Because Trump is looking like the opposite, the polar opposite to JFK. That's why he's able to get so far. Now, this next segment is really on correcting our relationship with technology, right? Because this article that I'm linking is focused on screen addiction in teens, right? And many of us older people, we may look at kids kind of just basically questioning this is, these people, they get online and they want to do all this crazy stuff online and ruin their lives and stuff like that. But we should understand, and I think a more accurate perspective in terms of really understanding the pressures and the environment that these kids are faced with, is that we should view them as really a new species of human, right? Because they are not subject to the same pressures that we are, right? And when I say the same pressures, it is, the error and all that stuff may not be drastically different to have some kind of new human come up or whatever, but the technology, these guys, they're not, it's not that they're a new species because they're really, the physical environment is changing, right? But their actual psychological environment, the change there is something that is completely drastic in terms of what they face versus what we faced. We haven't had time to really catch up and understand, right? We haven't had time to have a formal sit down with people and try to really understand the consequence of having phones and really just having this new environment today. And the weirdo tech bros and the social media companies, they're creating environments with this whole idea of moving fast and breaking things, and they will do whatever possible to make more money, right? And they're paying our politicians off, right? They're like, the idea is, hey, don't look at what we're doing, whatever. That's why we haven't really come to terms with the psychological environment in terms of the drastic difference in today versus us growing up, or older generations growing up. This is troublesome, right? Because they're treating everybody like numbers, and like I said before, they just want to make more money, right? So they're looking at these people, these populations of people that use their particular products. They're looking at them as data sheets, and with social media's case, they're trying to get more ad revenue through retaining people on their app for longer. So they're playing with different parameters and seeing how things really come out. And this idea, I think it feels eerily similar to my experience as in a particular microbiology lab, right? And the idea here is that I would expose populations of bacteria to antibiotics or some kind of bacterial viruses. They call them phages, but it's just a virus, right? And I would expose these, populations of bacteria, and I would simply just observe and learn about what I'm doing, because based on how bacteria reacted, right? So things like, I look at stuff like, okay, what kind of, I just look at basically their immune system and the population in general in terms of how many died off, or how many, where did the growth stop and stuff like that, right? I got pretty, I would say I got pretty good at adjusting populations of bacteria and performing a lot of the experiments, right? And I am seeing and just feeling how these people may be viewing us the way I view those bacteria in that, in that test flask. And that could be so dangerous, right? These guys are, most of the time, they're completely disconnected from humanity. They don't know what humanity is. You got Peter Thiel talking about we need to merge with computers, and then you got people who is it? Mark Zuckerberg talking about we need to get AI friends or something. These guys are they are disconnected. They're not connected to reality. They're not by any means. And they have no real pushback, right? Because they're surrounded by people who want their money. They're surrounded by people that they pay. They're not gonna tell them to keep it straight. Hey man, you sound like a weirdo. What are you talking about? Nobody's gonna put a chip in their brain for you idiot. Nobody's telling these guys that. So they think they're geniuses, and they're walking around like they're owning, they're gonna save humanity. It is so crazy. But that's how a lot of these guys think, and they talk, and they act, and they can pay politicians who would be responsible for regulating them and shedding and possibly shedding light on the things that they get done, or they're trying to get done. And when we talk about this idea, what these guys are doing, how they're treating people like numbers, addiction is one of the symptoms that really could easily be a factor in terms of, this is me being generous, it very much is the factor to me, but this is a symptom. And addiction, I think, is gauged through, or in this particular article, it talks about addiction and how addiction is gauged, and how they use a simple, like a survey questions in general, right? And these surveys questions seem powerful, and I'll put this up on the Substack so you can kind of get this if you just want to kind of read it off as well. But the idea here is that I read through these, and I'm really kind of surprised, I would say, because as a teen, or even in my early 20s, like, I'm kind of looking at these questions with the light of, man, I don't know how close I was, but I mean, this is kind of crazy, right? Because in terms of the questions themselves, or the statements themselves, they rank these 1 through, they basically say, hey, look, here are the statements. You either agree, highly agree, 10, or you don't, or you highly disagree, 1, or something like that, right? First statement is, I spend a lot of time thinking about social media apps or planning my use of social media apps. 2, I feel the need to use social media apps more and more. 3, arguments have arisen with others because of my phone use. 4, I have been unable to reduce my phone use. 5, I lose track of how much I am using my phone. 6, I play video games so I can forget about my problems. 7, I've become stressed or upset if I am not allowed to play video games. And that was the end of the question, or the end of the actual statements, right? And this idea of screen addiction, it's obviously a problem, but this article, it also highlights how the specific activity really yields more understanding of the particular issue, right? Because they talk about how, particularly when we talk about ranking screen time, video games have the strongest correlation to addiction. Okay, next up, we're talking about social media. I think they said video game addiction had like screen time had like a 40% correlation or something like that, and then screen addiction had like a 30%. But we should understand that this idea of addiction in general, it's like, when it comes down to thoughts that of pushing the reset button, if that's I think YouTube is acceptable, right? Those are more apparent in people who suffer from addiction. Okay, so what these people are doing, we should definitely get an understanding, right? And in this renaissance, I want us to take a good hard look at the path we're going down, because most of us know that social media can be very toxic, but we really haven't considered just how far in the hole we've gotten, right? Because our government has failed us tremendously here, and the tech companies, they're bipartisan lobbyists, right? They don't care. They're on the front lines, and they're going to promote more addictive, things, so they get more ad revenue, and they're also going to collect more personal data. Good understanding that I think a lot of people should have is that opium was legal and prescribed by doctors before we as a society really realized that we had to adjust our pattern and our behaviors because of the adverse impacts. It's likely that future generations are going to look at us as the test subjects in just this sick experiment, right? We need to really correct course here. And I'm actually, I want to say first, I want to say, and end this on a pretty good note at least, I'm actually really hopeful about how quick and drastic this correction can be once we take action, right? Because while a lot of people are like cynical in terms of about, you know, the state of mind about the, you know, the generations coming up, I would say I see a very unique background noise building, right? And this is due to just the amount of information that we're exposed to, right? And when we create the right environments, I predict that people, in terms of these new generations, they're going to surprise us in various ways, and they're going to be able to, and they're going to really show out. This next segment is really speaking to just regulation in terms of how it affects cities, or just in this particular case, how lack of regulation affects a city. Because Kowloon, Wall City, this is a place that was in China, and a place that essentially grew and expanded from essentially an abandoned military fort, and it became a haven for refugees and people in search of affordable housing, right? These guys were just building with what they had, no regulations, no architects. And these people were simply making do for a long time without any regulation, right? And before the city tore it down, it was actually the most dense city in the world. And when I say the most dense, I mean by far, because it was around 30 times more concentrated than the most dense city today. The problem is that it grew into a lawless slum, unfortunately, right? And I'm going to attach an article that highlights the cross-section done by a Japanese artist, and I think it's beautiful, and I have a particular appreciation, just as someone who used to just design blueprints and have to go through making a section cut in any case. I think it's really, I mean, I don't know, like I'm a fan of this particular art in general, this particular piece of art in general, but when we talk about today, or just the transformation that we need to really undergo, I always thought about this idea, this concept of creating the Foundry to really be subject to different regulations, different laws, right? A different set of pressures that we come up in, because it does appear that we kind of need to do a reworking and a rethinking, but we need to do it in the right way and have a good space to do that. And I'll write more about this. This is probably something that's going to inspire another article in terms of the Foundry R&D for, you know, to teach you guys. But the idea here is that Kowloon is, you know, it's a warning in terms of what happens when you're, you know, a city without regulation, but it also speaks to the ability and willingness of people to coexist and make do, right? This is very, very much hopeful in terms of the idea of what we can do as, you know, even the idea of the Foundry thinking about kind of creating a special zoning or a special zoning designation to the Foundry that allows for, you know, approved architects and builders to go in the fast lane for approval. And I mean, we gotta correct this, because we're building gates in communities, and that's supposed to signify safety, when you're really just kind of, you're creating a more hostile environment between you and the people outside of that gate. a lot of cases, and we are really messing this up. And I don't know, check out the city, check out the art. It's really cool, honestly. It really is. And that is the end of this particular episode. I want to say thank you for listening, if you listened through, and also leave you with a Renaissance musing question. The idea here is for particularly the Kowloon Wall City segment, we talked about what happened in Kowloon absent of regulation. What are your thoughts about regulation? What kind of pressures do you think would really be a safe environment for people in terms of actually, I'm thinking about reducing and helping the state of affordability, but also just the homeless population in general, and also just kind of helping create and platform people to take part in this particular system at some point, and to help develop them. And what are your thoughts about what that environment should entail? What kind of regulations? What should we think about in terms of maybe like, zoning or things like that? And how do we create the ideal space to really heal and actively help people become active participants and generate Renaissance people in general?